Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular session of the Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, February 8, 2017. We'll call the meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is items on consent, they being the minutes for the January 11, 2017 and January 25th, 2017 regular meetings. Anyone wish to comment on those individually? If not, Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
I have a motion from Mr. Dalla, second from Mr. Outlaw, to approve the consent agenda, the minutes for January 11, 2017 and January 25th, 2017. Call for vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda, item number 4. We have 2 items for individual consideration tonight. Item 4A is PC 2016-054. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Halley's Cove subdivision, Unit 1, an approximate 10-acre tract of land generally located east of FM 1518, approximately 1,375 feet south of Trainer Hale Road, City of Schertz, Bexar County, Texas. Jannery?
Good evening, Commissioners. The applicant is proposing to preliminary plat Unit 1 of the Halley's Cove subdivision, which will establish 21 single-family residential lots. The site is currently undeveloped and includes approximately 10 acres of land. It is located east of FM 1518 and about a quarter mile south of Trainer Hale Road. The master development plan was approved by City Council on September 27th of last year, at the same time that the Halley's Cove Plan Development District was approved. After the PDD was approved, a PDD amendment was requested and approved on January 24th by the City Council, and within that PDD amendment, it essentially modified the minimum required lot depth by 1 foot, and also incorporated a method to measure the lot depth for irregular lots, such as lots on cul-de-sacs or curved streets. The master development plan that was originally approved with the PDD did not change since it was last approved last September. And on here you can see Unit 1 immediately, it's on the left-hand side of the screen, takes access off of FM 1518. Staff has reviewed the lots proposed within Unit 1, and they comply with the minimum lot dimensional requirements that are required with the Halley's Cove PDD. Unit 1 includes 2 points of access off 1518. The northerly entrance, you'll notice on the plat exhibit, it's Halley Arrow, will be full access, and the southerly entrance, Halley Brook, will be right in and right out only. TxDOT has reviewed the proposed schematics, and they have provided their approval. Along 1518, there's a 20-foot TxDOT right-of-way dedication, and immediately behind the 20-foot dedication, there's also an additional 70-foot landscape buffer, which was an additional design standard that was required by the Halley's Cove PDD. This particular unit, Unit 1, does not include parkland dedications, but as you can see on the master development plan, the overall plan includes approximately 30 acres of land that would be dedicated as public parklands. Along the northerly portion, there's a proposed lot here that is about 24 acres, and along the southerly portion here, it's an additional 12-acre lot, and those are included as future phases or units. The site would be serviced by Schertz for water, CPS for electricity, AT&T and Time Warner for cable, internet, and phone service. Once the sewer lines to CCMA's South Schertz plant is constructed, Halley's Cove will be able to tie in for service by the future treatment plant. In the meantime, units 1 and 2 would be temporarily serviced with pump and haul by a licensed vendor. The specifics related to the pump and haul plan would need to be reviewed by city staff and approved at the time of final plat. As part of the preliminary plat, staff has requested some conceptual information, and those have been provided. The stormwater management plan was submitted with the Halley's Cove master plan, and then along with the units 1 and 2, subsequent stormwater management plans were submitted, reviewed, and approved by the city engineer. The plat is consistent with all applicable zoning regulations, ordinances, and zoning requirements, and staff recommends approval. That concludes staff's presentation, and we have a representative for the applicant as well.
Very good, thank you. The applicant wish to make any statement at this time? All right. All right, commissioners, comments, questions, concerns?
Mr. Chairman, curiosity more than anything else, if I look at the drawing correctly, there's 1,000 feet between those two entrances. I'm just curious why we're just doing right in, right out on the southern one. That's
Andrew Rodriguez, 15 Firethorn, San Antonio, Texas. The southern entrance is going to be in and out. Ultimately, it's going to be a right in and right out once they improve TxDOT, FM 1518. So at this time, it is going to be in and out both ways. But FM 1518 is in the works.
okay. So it was a TxDOT request that
Yes.
that it eventually be right in, right out? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just thought 1,000 feet wouldn't be an issue, but thank you.
So right now, it's going to be right in, right out.
No,
I mean,
right now,
that-
it's going to be just a normal entrance. But when they ultimately expand FM 1518, they requested that there only be one in and out on the northern one. And the southern one would only be in coming from I-10 and going back out to the north.
There'd be a raised median in between.
Yes, there's going to be a median, and the median opening is only going to be in the northern entrance.
Can we make that reference in the access and circulation write-up for this plot?
Sure. Well,
I believe we've already incorporated TxDOT's notes that they requested.
it was part of the MVP.
Yeah, and the master development plan specified that the northerly entrance would be full access and that the southerly entrance would be right in, right out only.
Well, we actually have a TxDOT, the TxDOT driveway permits already for Unit 1.
Yeah, I think I might have something from TxDOT.
And I think it's in the TxDOT notes up there at the very top.
Well, it is included in your comments about access and circulation.
Oh,
My eyes are probably not good enough to see whether it's in one of the plat notes, but
Yes, it's actually going to be the plat note number 5 under TxDOT notes.
okay.
Kind of small.
here, let me try to read. Let me see if I could read it. Otherwise, I have the full-size plans.
You can read it.
Here you go.
Oh, no, that's not what mine said. And you said the PDD also says that it's going to be limited access?
at this time, it's gonna have access to both of them. It's gonna have full access to both of them. At the time when they come in and widen TxDOT is when they're gonna put that island that's it's gonna force the vehicles to just come in from the south and go out only to the north. Obviously, because of the median that's gonna be in the middle of the highway. But as of right now, these plats are gonna have both accesses at both entrances. And they can go either way.
So,
The TxDOT notes just say that we have 2 access points is all it says.
I don't think that's what Note 5 conveys.
You are correct. It doesn't reflect that.
Could we add that?
It doesn't reflect the in and out. Well, those are notes TxDOT is requiring. So basically what it's saying is they're allowed to have 2 access points, full access points. However, what Channery's explaining as when they improve FM 1518, they're going to have a raised median in the middle, which will make the southerly one or the northerly one, whichever one it is, a right in, right out only. So it's going to be depicted on the plans for TxDOT. So right now they're going to be full access driveways until the time TxDOT comes in and puts the median, and then one will end up being a right in, right out only.
and we have a letter from TxDOT where they actually reviewed the schematics, and they specifically indicated that they want, right here, you could, well, let me see. I have to pull it out of the.
I'm always bothered on waiting for somebody else to do something at a later date. I mean, 1518 could be drifting out there with TxDOT for years, as it already has.
Right, but it
While
is a
developing.
state highway, so TxDOT has the jurisdiction over it, so they're allowing the 2 points of access.
Right, and I don't have any problem with that. I just think it might be helpful to us in the long run to have that note included on the plat for filing, and then, 7 years from now, when TxDOT finally decides to do something to 1518, and we're going back to check on all these developments that by then are fronting on 1518, we can take all these things into account.
So
They
you
may
want
have-
us to send it back to TxDOT and ask them for that? I mean, because ultimately it's their jurisdiction on if we were to allow the access or not. And so I guess, are you asking us to alter TxDOT notes, or are you
No.
asking it for a different note?
But I can understand what Channery's saying, but that's not reflected in a TxDOT note on the plat.
Well, so the reason it's not reflected in the TxDOT note is when we transmit this to TxDOT, since it's in their right-of-way, we request that whatever notes TxDOT indicates be included on the plat. That's what we put on there. We have the applicant put on there. We don't request any revisions to those notes because it's not our right-of-way.
Mr. Chairman, if I understand the explanation that's going on out here, it's not that the developer is going to make it right in, right out. TxDOT is going to put a median down the center of 1518, and that's going to make it right in, right out.
Yeah,
Right.
for traffic control purposes, to limit the number of places you can enter and exit the roadway.
I understand that, but if they said that in a note someplace, it would be nice to have that on the plat.
So their letter here, if you look on the top here, plat was reviewed for existing right-of-way data. They have no objection to existing. Plan right-of-way needs. They have no objection. And then attached to this letter, they show schematics that the applicant prepared 3 different schematics for them, for TxDOT to review, where you could see here there's option A, B, and C. Here's A, which was,
That was 2 median cuts.
yes, this was full access on both access points. Option B is the right-in, I call that the pork chop there. It's the right-in, right-out only on the southerly portion, and then the full access with the median cut on the northerly access point. And then schematic option C,
It was just a
It's-
longer run.
it's a longer run to provide additional time to merge in.
Yeah, the decel and XL lanes.
Yes. And TxDOT's letter that they provided indicates no objection to the existing right-of-way, the plan right-of-way needs, and then on the very bottom, they indicate that they specify that option B is going to be required once they make once they make the right-of-way improvements, make improvements to 1518.
And maybe what we can do is get with TxDOT and the city engineer, because if they've all reviewed the documents and they feel like the safety of the way the roadway is right now is safe, then it meets all the requirements of the city code and state law and TxDOT. And so we can, after this is done, before preliminary and final, we can get with them again and make sure there aren't any concerns for safety purposes and bring that back with the final plat.
Could we not just attach their letter to the plat? I mean,
And-
if they've just got a column there, no objection, some of this could be lost in translation later
But
on.
that is all on the plat. Their notes, the TxDOT notes are on the plat.
Those notes are.
That bold,
What's not on,
Yes,
the bold block
right there.
is all
This-
they want us
That's
to
what's
back.
not on the plan.
yes.
Right, the one that they,
That
yeah.
right there.
The
That's
option.
what's not on here. Anywhere, not even in field notes.
And my initial question was the write-up under access and circulation. If we approve this tonight, we're approving it saying that there's going to be limited access on one of the entrances. But until TxDOT modifies 1518, which could be 10 years from now, it's going to be free access on both of them. So I'm saying, make our write-up or make a schematic or make a note on the plat to say that. Until 1518 is modified, we're going to have full access both ways.
Okay,
Because until we do that, we'll be in violation of this that we'll approve, and what eventually will go to city council, will be in violation of that could be for 10 years from now. So let's just put in here exactly what's going to happen. And it also says TxDOT has approved the proposed schematic. I don't see any schematic. I don't have a schematic.
Channery, could you put option B back up there for just a moment?
yes.
And Mr. Bo, that's not a problem. If you want to make that a condition that we provide that with the final plat to make sure that it's clear, we certainly can do that.
So you see what they're doing. Well, I do see they add a little bitty median there to kind of separate traffic, but
It's ultimately going to be a bigger one. It's going to be something that TxDOT will design. This is just a schematic showing you that it's going to be there's not going to be, those cars are not going to be able to cross over and go south.
yeah.
That's basically what it's showing.
So as part of the final plat, I think maybe what we could do is we could add under the general note a note that addresses your concern about the full access currently, but as
The TxDOT
that
comes up with
TxDOT comes
final
up with.
plan, that's going to dictate what's going to happen out here.
Yeah, this is
TxDOT could come back and put a center lane in, and then guess what? We both have access off of both entrances.
I will say, from a public safety standpoint, the whole reason we put two access points into a subdivision is in case something happens and one is blocked, we can access the other one, and now TxDOT's going to take that away from us with a median. So, and that's not it's not something you're doing, just a comment from my experience. I'm sure what the guys would do is just go the wrong way down 1518 for 1,000 feet. But it's the kind of thing I see that we do our best to accommodate our needs, and then you've got the planners in New Braunfels or Austin or whoever comes up with this stuff, and they kind of throw the monkey wrench out there. So,
I'm just concerned that we get everything on paper, on the plat, that is going to be subsequently done. And unless we get a note in there on the,
We'll never get out of here now. So yeah, you won't. And this is when I sort of step in. So let me be clear with some of this stuff, particularly in TxDOT jurisdiction. So TxDOT is the entity that decides what the access can be, is going to be as part of this approval a month from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as the road changes or stays the same, and we all know it's going to be approved. So understand that TxDOT has that authority. TxDOT can go out at any point and say, this isn't safe. We've seen you built something, it's not safe. We're changing it, you have to change it. You can't do it. It's in their right of way, so they've got the ability to go make those adjustments, which is how they go out and they make improvements. While I appreciate the commission's concern that today TxDOT is saying this, and so let's get it on the plat, the problem is that we've got this note on the plat that creates the impression of some kind of permanence that frankly TxDOT can show up and we say, we don't care what the Plan Zoning Commission for City of Schertz put on the plat, this is what we're doing with that. And not that they would necessarily kind of thumb their nose at you that way, but the problem that we often run into when we start trying to document all of these things via the plat is that this road segment is improved, it's widened, it's a different condition than we imagine. You know, again, imagine it's not today, and imagine it's not 5 years from now. Imagine it's not 10 years from now. So 10 years from now, how many of us in this room are still going to be around? Cannery, Emily, Bryce, maybe a couple of you, but frankly, some won't be. So imagine 20 years, in all seriousness, 20 years from now, who's still around to remember this? And at that point, somebody has pulled this thing and said, TxDOT made this change to the road 7 years ago. It's no longer consistent with this note. Some issue has prompted somebody to come in and they bought a second lot, they want to combine it, but I've got this plat note on here that is now jamming me up. And that's the problem with trying to lock this in via the plat, is it frankly gives us a false sense of security, because ultimately it's up to TxDOT, but then it creates this issue that I've got a note on the plat that it's not in keeping with because TxDOT's made a change, that now I've got to hang up there, that at some point when they're trying to do a replat or a mini plat, planner's going, yeah, we got a problem, calling the attorney going, I got this problem, the plat's got this note, it's not that way, that's the issue. So again, while I can appreciate we want to lock this in, ultimately it's up to TxDOT, and us putting a note or not putting a note doesn't impact that whatsoever. It happens to do with what TxDOT says. So frankly, if they go down and lobby TxDOT while they're under construction, TxDOT says, oh, we've changed our mind, it's not safe, or they can adjust it. Again, unless that change by TxDOT creates a violation with our subdivision ordinance that we would then have to call the attorney and say, TxDOT won't give them a second, they now don't comply with the 2 points of access, that's when we got to come back and figure out what we do. But that happens whether you put a note on there or not. And so again, while I appreciate what I understand the sentiment to be, I think our deal is let's not clutter it with notes that we think are helpful. One of the things to keep in mind that we're doing now is, for some who've been up here a while, these staff reports you get now are much longer than they were before. And we use that to document what happened and what the discussion was. And so a note will go in the plat, the minutes will reflect this long discussion, ultimately which way you go. So if it's about having something in there going, it was a big deal to the commission to make sure that we didn't miss what TxDOT had said inadvertently, there's a better way to do it on a note on the plat that frankly, once it gets added, nobody's ever going to look at. So if that helps, hopefully.
So basically what you're saying, Brian, is, back to Richard's comment, you know, everything is in the notes except for that option B that TxDOT has said, you know, when the time comes, that's what we're going to use.
Yeah.
So we don't put that on there.
Yeah.
And they go about their business, and the development occurs thinking that that's what's ultimately going to happen, and in 9 years from now, TxDOT says, oh, by the way, before you do anything more to that road, we're going to change it.
That's exactly right. And so again, my position tends to be, unless TxDOT says, we want you to put a note on the plat, and then again, we'll check with the attorney, we don't go putting a bunch of notes on plats in an attempt to be helpful because of exactly that factor. So again, if what you want to do is make very clear to everybody, we can have Channery get over there and on the cover of the plat file, truly, because that's what we'll see, a big red marker going, don't miss TxDOT. That's the stuff we kind of catch. and it doesn't create a problem down the road, and it doesn't give a false sense of security.
You keep looking at me.
No, I'm not.
I never.
I like looking at you.
Thank you. I never
I
asked.
missed Mr. Crawford, and so now I have to look at you.
I never asked for a note on the plat.
No, I didn't think you did.
I'll ask simply to annotate this write-up to say that we're going to have full access if and until 1518 or TxDOT makes up their mind. Because when this goes through and people are turning left and right all over the place, I'm going to go, we didn't approve that. We approved this.
So, again, understand,
Otherwise, this is meaningless.
well, to some degree it is. What we're saying here with the current note is, let me be clear, TxDOT has approved the proposed schematic of limiting da-da-da-da. That's, in fact, we can all say, yep, TxDOT's done that. What TxDOT does tomorrow, who knows? Again, I think the developer says, we're perfectly fine with this, we don't have an issue with it, we're not going to continue to lobby. But frankly, yeah, you can have developers continue to lobby TxDOT, waiting for the next election, and then some senator, congressman calling down TxDOT, and then all of a sudden things change. I mean, so I hate to even change the language in here. Maybe if this works for you, what we will do, what we can do in this case is we will put a copy of the minutes in the file. So all of this discussion, including that statement you made of, hey, here's what I'm concerned about, that'll be in the record, and we can mark that up with big notes going, read the minutes regarding the TxDOT thing. And that's frankly how a planner down the road is going to catch that.
Oh, and maybe we didn't express it. Maybe not everybody's on the same page on the thought process on this. But for me, looking at it and listening to this conversation, the thinking is that 5 years, 10 years down the road, when TxDOT comes and starts doing this, is that we're going to have this whole neighborhood coming in here, everybody jumping up and down and screaming at us that, hey, this isn't what we were expecting. And if we could somehow document the fact that this is a possibility, and they come in and say, look, it's right here, and
Only caution I would have, and I appreciate the sentiment. The problem we've got is no one who buys a home here is going to look at the plat document and read the notes. No one who buys a home out here is frankly going to check the adjacent zoning to say this is what can be developed. And we've seen that before. Again, I appreciate the sentiment. I think the reality is I would take the position we do better to say the reality of the world that we live in, particularly in a growing community. We're not up in some place that has very little growth that frankly you go back home and it hasn't changed a lot over the years or decline of population. We are in a changing condition. For those who've been here for 15 years, Schertz is a very different place than it was 15 years ago. We've been here 5 years, very different, and it will continue to be different. And I would rather take the position to tell folks, the reality is you're in a growing community and change is happening. We can't make promises about things going forward. They're inherently prone to change. Because if those residents are angry because they don't like what's going to happen, us pointing out, and I'm being Brian-like how I sometimes say things, hey, you should have known it's on the plat, that answer is not going to go over well because most people don't tend to respond well to, I have no right to be angry because it's frankly my own fault, I should have known. Because frankly, we wouldn't know how it would play out. I think, again, what we heard from the citizen survey, those who are there, is we need to do a better job communicating with citizens. And so part of what we need to do is different ways, Schertz Magazine, website, to let folks know, here are things that are going to be in process. 1518 is going to be changing down the road. 1103 is changing down the road. That'll catch some people, won't catch everybody.
An easy solution.
Okay.
In access and circulation, the fourth line down, it starts Halley Arrow, the northerly entrance, blah, blah, blah. Scratch that sentence.
Again, the staff report is written, so I can't destroy this document or alter it. This version will always be in the file because it's what we published, it's what we sent out. So changing a staff report, all I'm doing is I got this second version with it changed that creates confusion. I would rather highlight the minutes saying Mr. Bro took issue, felt it was more appropriate to eliminate that statement because of da-da-da-da-da. I think that conveys the point. But understand, I can't go changing a staff report. When somebody calls up and goes, I want the staff report that went to P&Z, I'm going to give them this one
What we can do is clarify the language in the staff report for the final plat when that comes forward.
Noted. Thank you. Another question on parks. Who's going to own the parkland?
That'll be dedicated to the city, so it'll be ultimately the city.
Wow.
All right, the only question I have is, do we have any idea how long this pump and haul is going to last?
So the pump and haul plan will be in place until construction of the sewer lines and connection to the South Schertz plant will be completed, and I believe the estimated time frame for that is 2018? 2018?
Subdivision. Assume you got a construction period for the subdivision, construction period for the houses to get people in. You know, you're probably talking year and a half. One of the things to keep in mind this, while nobody is saying this is a great situation, the benefit of doing the pump and haul in the interim for the city is when we open that sewer plant and we're having to pay through our bills to operate it, I want as many people coming online as soon as possible. And so the benefit of this is, frankly, they're going to have X number of customers sending waste down there literally day one, and that's of an advantage to the city to have that happen, as opposed to we get the thing built, it just sits there. I mean, I don't know what you do if there's nobody tied into that pipe. You know, obviously we'll have the crossvine lift coming off, but it doesn't work if you don't have enough flows. So there is some advantage to us to entering into these pump and haul agreements so that day one that plant has more flow through it.
Are we putting the sewer in during this development to reach down to the plant?
No, this development will stub to where the line will come in, and as part of the agreement we'll do on the pump and haul, we'll stipulate the cost to actually make that connection because they'll be ahead of us. So the idea is that it's cost neutral for the city having them tie in.
Okay.
We build the trunk line up Lemmenhauering Creek. They've paid to connect it. They've got the infrastructure in, and when we get our line, it's just connected in, but now we can plan for it, so it's cheaper day one. I mean, literally, when we build the pipe, we build the connection, and it's good to go. So they will put it in within the subdivision and design it in a way that it allows it to tie into the Lemmenhauering line that we are building.
All right, where is the tank that's going to hold this effluent until it's pumped off every Friday morning or whatever?
So the applicant proposed the tank to be within Unit 3, and when I go over the plat for Unit 2, I can show you where those easements are so that it ensures that the location of the tank would be in an area that we've already had adequate easements accounted for. But to answer your question now, since we haven't reviewed Unit 2 yet, there's an easement that goes along Hallie Chase here, and then it'll be right here. And then there's an additional temporary easement along Hallie Dawn, and then it's going to go down towards Chase.
Yes, it's actually going to be,
The tank is where?
okay, well, on Unit 1, it ends like this. So we're going to have an easement that comes all the way down this way, and the tank's going to sit right there,
Okay.
like so. So the tank's going to sit right here. And the last manhole with Unit 2 is going to be there. We're going to cut across and tie into that.
So essentially, if you look at the preliminary plat for Unit 1, there is a temporary easement for that location for the tank initially. Or excuse me, Unit 2.
Will this be a temporary tank?
Oh, that's Unit 1. Pardon me?
Will this be a temporary tank?
Yes.
Underground, above ground?
The storage tank will be above ground. He's going to pump out of that last manhole into the storage tank. It's still under design.
And Channery, if I understood you correctly in our conversation the other day, Unit 3 and 4 are contingent upon the sewer line being in, correct? That the pump and haul was only going to be for
Well,
1 and 2?
Well, right now, because we've only received applications for units 1 and 2, the data that was submitted by the applicant was for units 1 and 2, and that's what we reviewed. Public Works and Engineering looked at the capacity and the storage tanks being proposed, and we've only analyzed that for units 1 and 2.
Thank you.
Who and when are the impact fees going to be collected?
I believe it's outside the service area of the impact fees. I'd have to double check, but I think it's outside the service area, so there aren't any.
What service area? It's got to be in the city service area.
Well, let me back up. Our impact fee last update would have had to included this entire area in it, and I'm not sure it does. I'd have to go back and check. So if it's in the service area, they would pay at time of connection. We do it with the lot. I would just have to double check to make sure it's all in our service area, or impact fees, which is different than our CCN.
So it could be at some point in time when the south plant is built that either CCMA or Schertz or both will have to knock on every door and say, you owe us $4,000.
No,
Why not?
because you can't, impact fees don't work that way. Mr. Bro, let me double check and see if it's in the service area, and we can communicate that to you. I would just caution before we stand and say it's definitely in our impact fee service areas. I would want to verify that because, again, for example, we've had areas that have subsequently come into the city limits that were not covered in our impact fee service area when that last update was done. So, for instance, the stuff we're doing with Reserve at Schertz, the Harry Hausman stuff, that's not paying a city impact fee. It's in Sarah's service area, so they have their own connection fee, but it's not paying a sewer impact fee to the city because it's not in the impact fee service area.
Okay, so it's in CCMA service area. So who's going to collect that impact fee?
So we would collect it at the time of the building permit, would likely tie that in with the agreement to do the pump and haul. So we're not going to go knock on a door later and connect. We're going to connect now as an interim. We're going to charge now because this is an interim situation till the line gets there.
So CCMA will get an impact fee. Schertz may or may not.
I have to check the service area. If
Okay.
it's in the service area, we'll get it. If it's not, then we won't.
Thank you.
Comments, concerns?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve PC 2016-054, Halley's Cove, Unit 1, preliminary plat.
Second.
A motion from Mr. Outlaw, second from Mr. Glumbick to approve PC 2016-054, preliminary plat for Halley's Cove. Any further discussion? Not, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is PC 2016-060. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Halley's Cove Subdivision Unit 2, an approximate 9-acre tract of land generally located east of FM 1518, approximately 1,375 feet south of Trainer Hale Road, City of Schertz, Bexar County, Texas. Channery.
So Unit 2 will establish 26 single-family residential lots. As you can see on this master development plan, it's immediately behind Unit 1. The site is currently undeveloped, and includes approximately 9 acres of land. The lots proposed within Unit 2 have been reviewed by staff, and they comply with the minimum lot dimensional requirements stipulated in the Halley's Cove PDD. Unit 2 includes 2 points of access. As you can see here, they connect to Unit 1, and on the plat exhibit, you'll see it's Halley Haven and Halley Chase. And similar to Unit 1, this specific unit does not include parkland dedication. However, the overall master development plan identifies dedicated parklands along the northerly and southerly portions of the overall master plan for Halley's Cove. The site will be serviced by Schertz for water, CPS for electricity, AT&T and Time Warner for cable and internet and phone services. And similar to Unit 1, the plan is a temporary pump and haul plan that would be serviced by a licensed vendor until the sewer line and South Schertz plant are completed and ready to tie into. Excuse me. The plat is consistent with all applicable zoning requirements, ordinances, and regulations, and staff recommends approval.
All right, thank you. Commissioners? Concerns about Unit 2?
Yes. Yes. I missed the initial discussion on the PDD, so this may relate to that. But what's going to happen to that little structure? There appears to be a little driveway down to a house or something. What's going to happen to that?
Yeah, right there. So there's this, I believe it's an access easement that takes access off 1518 that leads to that home. And that'll,
I'm sorry, it's actually a gravel drive that goes back to the house. The drive is going to be taken out. And the home is also going to be taken out.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments, questions? Not, Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I recommend we approve PC 2016-060, Halley's Cove Unit 2 preliminary plat.
A second.
A motion from Mr. Golombek, second from Mr. Dolly to approve PC 2016-060, preliminary plat of Halley's Cove Unit 2. Any further discussion? Not, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Next item, item 5 on our agenda is workshops and discussion. We have 2 tonight. 5A is a public hearing, workshop, and discussion regarding the Master Thoroughfare Plan update. Mr. James.
Thank you. What's that? No, this probably isn't what you think it's going to be. This is really not a detailed conversation, more just the fact that we had put these on pause for a while. We have a new commissioner with us and wanted to take a moment to spend a bit of time to sort of get us back up to speed. And as we start moving this forward, to maybe kind of touch on a few things that are likely to be issues as we go forward, and that's based on some of the things that we've got. So in reality, you'll recall we're doing an update to the city's master thoroughfare plan. As part of that effort, we're also doing a roadway impact fee study as well. As was referenced earlier by the conversation between Mr. Bro and myself, we currently have water and sewer impact fees in most of the city of Schertz. We do not have a roadway impact fee, which is another one the state allows. And so as part of the thoroughfare plan update, we're doing that study. As part of that study, we're also doing, it will help us deal with rough proportionality issues and serves as the test for rough proportionality. But with regard to the thoroughfare plan, I will point out that one of the things that you've probably heard from folks, or that challenges that we've had, have to do often with very much future conditions. And that seems to be the issue that we've got and that we've heard from the public with regard to the thoroughfare plan are, you have a road shown to bisect someone's property, run adjacent to someone's property, and their feeling is, I don't want this road here. I don't need this road here. I don't want the city to plan for this road here today. What I would remind you is that I can guarantee that when the thoroughfare plan was last created, conversations like that, some with maybe the same property owners, some with different property owners, occurred. And I can certainly appreciate that, and we certainly heard that from a number of property owners here. On the one hand, it's often easy to say, well, there's no plan to build that road. It's a generalized location that's shown on the map. It's subject to change and adjustments, and we have no idea when it will ever be built. The problem with that is that while it is a generalized location, it is the generalized location where we think at this point the road should go. And I think it's safe to make the assumption that ultimately a road will go there. And that's a harder conversation to have. The other part of it is, while we often have new roads built by development, a developer comes in, I've got this piece back here, I need to extend a road. The example of that, and I always forget the name of it, right up off Schertz Parkway at the end of Live Oak that's doing the grading work, opposite side of Schertz Parkway. Benzel Farms, thank you. I always forget. Benzel Farms. The extension of Live Oak is being constructed as part of that project. So again, city didn't have the money to go out, make that extension. We waited for development to happen. But likely at some point, as development continues and that road continues on, we may get to a point where we say, we need to bridge this connection, and the city may very well go in. So we don't have the ability to say, it won't happen until development occurs, because it may very well happen before development occurs, and that's occurred in the past in our city as well. But really, I think the issue that we're facing with those are, people look at their situation today and their desires today, and then you look at the desires down the road. By way of comparison, last night at City Council, and so that you all know, we began posting the council meeting, the videos online. So in case you have something else to do Tuesday, you're welcome to, on Wednesday, or when it gets posted, Wednesday, Thursday, sit at home and watch it on your computer. And one of the things you'll notice last night is some folks got up and they talked about the need for the city to move forward in partnership with CCMA on the South Schertz treatment plant and the Woman Hollering line. One of the folks that got up and spoke referenced Harry Hausman and his projects, including this one of Howie's Cove. And so you may recall, we initially started that Woman Hollering Creek line. A lot of the property owners whose properties those bisected came out and said, we don't want this here. And so I think the thing to keep in mind is, last night we had people whose properties were bisected who said, world's changing. It's not what it was when my family bought the property 100 and something years ago. It's not going to continue to be. It's not viable to farm and agriculture uses. Development is coming. The reality is we live in a fast-growing state and a fast-growing region of that state, and the world is very different. We need to plan for it. We need to put in infrastructure. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that at times with these pushback we get on roads, there is likely some adjacent property owner who is saying, but I need that road for access, because as Commissioner Outlaw pointed out, for you to build a subdivision, you've got to have two ways in. And so if we don't plan for that, we inherently landlock a property owner, and you'll face someone stand up going, but I can't, I've only got one way, I can't do it. You didn't extend a road into my property. Why would you not do that? It's a 200-acre tract. You can clearly see there was one way in. We needed a second. And so to remind those who've been on, we've talked about, it really is planning for the future. And the problem you have with roads is that if you don't start planning for it now, it significantly decreases the likelihood that you will ever get that road in. Once you start letting development occur without that road saying, well, I don't think we need it today, it creates a problem for the property owner, there is likely someone who's sitting up here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, who has that issue. Now, that's not to say you simply need to blindly approve every proposed road. Certainly, we need to look at, are there better alignments? But likely, if this person doesn't want it, unless you've got an adjacent property owner who goes, I'm an investor, I'd love to have that road because I think it adds value, the next guy's not going to want it either. And how is it fair to move it off this property owner who doesn't want it to this property owner who may not want it because they squawk less loud, as opposed to say, look, what makes sense from a design perspective is to come through here, which is why we try to straddle property lines. One gets half, the other gets half. It allows for easier access. We do those things by design. And so that's one of the issues going forward. Again, the other thing I will say is if you remember back what the area was like 20 years ago, you probably could not have imagined this is what it'd be like today. You would not have thought in 20 years it would be this big and this crazy. You know, and I've used those examples. And so that's what we have to plan for the future. The last thing is a lot of that traffic we're dealing with is not Schertz traffic. And I'll give you sort of a contrary example. We have residents in Laura Heights who are complaining about roads that go through Converse to get into their subdivision. The Converse section's a mess. It's not been improved. What's going on? We've got residents in Cibolo complaining about Schertz roads that they're driving on going, it's not big enough. And so one of the things that is important is we have to remember that we are dealing with a lot of background traffic that we don't control. So we are not in control of our destiny with regard entirely to how much traffic we're going to have. We can downzone properties, we can limit development. If Cibolo doesn't and development continues, as is consistent with their plan, Converse, Universal City, et cetera, San Antonio, that traffic coming through our city is going to affect us one way or the other. The biggest problem, frankly, that we've had, and I will say, are those property owners who say, I've owned this land for X number of years, I don't plan to develop, I don't want the road. I can appreciate that. We should look to see if there's a way we can find a solution, but I would simply caution to say, eliminating that road to make that property owner happy today is not necessarily a good long-term decision. And I think we've seen some property owners and saw some representatives, property owners last night, who when we did the comp plan update, the sector plan update, said we want this to stay rural. But as they've seen development come and the world change, it's not what it had been. And as people have knocked on the door and say, you know, how much are you looking to sell? How much you think? And here's what we're maybe offering, reasonably enough. At that point, their position has changed with it. And so understand that even in the case. But the reality is there's some folks who their position will never change. I've owned it, going to continue on it, don't want to develop. That's the inherent balance we have to strike going forward. And that is going to be the toughest thing you face, our property owners going forward. So I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions about, is there an alternative route? What does the modeling show? Why does it show we need this road? Is it really necessary? What does it do to other property owners going forward? So that, again, we can make an informed decision, not just about today, but for about down the road. The last thing is, again, you keep in mind our shape. We have very limited access north-south, and that's the biggest challenge we have. It's getting from central Schertz, where we are, down to southern Schertz. And again, I will remind you, and if you watch the video, we had a lot of people stand up and say, I want that sewer service because we want to develop. Those are those folks who would rely on an additional road that's not there today coming through to provide for that access. Otherwise, when people talk about, I moved to Schertz to get away from all of the mess and the traffic, Schertz is going to be just like that. So again, you should ask questions, ask us to show you the data, ask us to show you the modeling, ask about alternatives, especially when people ask that, but that's going to be the challenge going forward. So what we're looking at doing is providing the notices and starting that process at the next meeting or the meeting after that. Again, wasn't planning to go through and show you all the analysis, was just more as a refresher, especially with some new members, to kind of get back what we're trying to do. Again, what we could do is approve the thoroughfare plan update, choose not to do roadway impact fees. In all likelihood, we'd still create a rough proportionality issue to solve that. The other is we could create the roadway impact fee, but then the policy question is, where do we set those fees? And again, I think the comment was made earlier, someone has to pay for this stuff. Question we have with roadway impact fees is, who do you want to make pay for it? Existing residents, people buying in, but there are pros and cons to that. We talk about needing commercial development for tax-based reasons. Those roadway impact fees apply to those developers as well. We say, I was looking at Schertz, but I'm not so sure now. So that was all really to remind you, let you know we'll be coming back, and I'll answer any questions. We can do the public hearing.
Thank you, Brian. Our vast audience obviously is probably not interested in this public hearing, but it is a public hearing item tonight. So we'll open the public hearing at 6:57. Yes, sir. Please give us your name and address for the record.
Yes, sir. My name is Alan Gormley. I'm at 16106 Santa Catrina in San Antonio, and I'm actually here for the second public hearing, and I'm hearing what Mr. James has to say. I'm a developer, and I got all this gray hair from, meetings like this, sitting out here and talking to those homeowners that didn't want the street or didn't want something. But I want to tell you how important your job is. I mean, the city should really be appreciative and respectful of what you're doing. And, I'm nearly at the end of my career, not quite retired, and over the last 40 years I've seen those dotted lines that are on these thoroughfare plans, and today we're driving them in San Antonio, and there are HEBs and there are schools, and the discussions that you guys have and the reports that you get from your staff, it's really important. And this is not at all why I came here tonight, but I didn't want you guys to be lonesome up here.
Yeah, we're happy you're here.
But your work is terribly important, and that discussion that he just had with you will manifest itself someday to an HEB, or to an apartment complex, or to a big community. And what you do, I'd say, really pay attention to, and ask these guys, rely on your staff, because over the life of a city, as I've watched San Antonio grow over many years, these dotted lines become streets. And it's a big deal. So, your work is very important. I appreciate what he's saying. There's there's always a give and take. There's always an adverse person. But your work is very important. And someday, when he's got lots of gray hair like I do, you'll see these streets connected down to Lower Seguin Road, coming up the streets that you wanted. They'll be there, but they'll be there because you guys paid attention. And I just applaud your work and just tell you that your work is very important to the life of this city. And someday, those streets need to be there. They're not always fun for a developer like me, but it is a real life situation, and I appreciate what you do, and you want to do the best job you can, because you're going to have streets that go like this if you don't. I'm not in favor of the split, right-of-way things, but you're doing a very important job, and the transportation plan is really, really important. And just want to say that for you, because it's true. And when you know, a lot of these guys get gray hair, they're going to be dealing with a missing street and wish it were there, or they're going to be standing back and saying, that's pretty neat. There's an elementary school there. There's a HEB there, and there are nice communities there. And you guys help it all fit together. You're the continuity. So I appreciate what you do, and just know that what you're doing is really, really important.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. All right. There being no one else to take advantage of our public hearing, we'll close it at 7:02 and open for discussion. Commissioners?
Well, just based on experience, I can comment on what Mr. James said about planning for the future. When I moved into Savannah Square in the summer of 1989, Savannah Drive dead-ended just past Davenport. Today, it goes all the way through to 1518, which sometimes, typically we come home that way from 35, and it just, I'm sure it's only that way because someone sometime back did a master thoroughfare plan that showed that road going through there. Woodland Oaks is another one. Now, it doesn't go quite as far, but it now bridges Schertz Parkway and 3009 because somebody planned for it to be that way. So when the builders came in, you know, we made sure it got that way. So thank you, and we'll look for the future.
I can echo Glenn's comment, but I was only a year behind him. However, Schertz Parkway was just getting started. 3009 was a dark two-lane road at night. You couldn't see anybody coming or going. There was nothing there. So, you know, we've been looking at those roads for a long time, and we benefit from them today greatly. All right. No further, this is just, oh, go ahead.
Based on the compliments that we received from our guest, would the chair entertain a motion to increase our compensation by 100%?
Every year, I'm happy to do it.
200%. You'd come out to movies in the park when we showed Elf in December, you would have gotten free pancakes.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the update. Next item on our agenda, item 5B, is a public hearing, workshop, and discussion regarding the South Schertz Comprehensive Land Plan update.
Okay. So as you know, most of you know, I think from previous discussions and discussions at City Council, we are entertaining at this point an amendment, or a series of amendments is actually the way we'll likely go, to our comprehensive plan for Southern Schertz. This is prompted by really a couple things. One is, as I mentioned in the last item, we have started to have property owners who before said no development, no development, no development, start coming in and saying, well, maybe more development, we're not as inclined to keep things rural. But the real impetus has been the update to the joint land use study for Randolph Air Force Base that was done a couple of years ago. And that had a number of different changes with regard to it in terms of some of the items for implementation, some of which are new development regulations. We've created sound attenuation regulations within the noise contours that you can see that we weren't doing before. Again, the document also makes recommendations as to what types of uses are allowed in the sound, in the noise contours as well. But the big change, this is the issue, is that in the previous JLUs, these areas in the APZ2, the Accident Potential Zone 2, allowed development of lots that were a half acre in size, essentially 2 units per acre. What's occurred subsequently, and you can barely see it on the map, is the Laura Heights development, among other things. And frankly, the folks at Randolph who participated in that effort and their consultants that came and said, that wasn't what we sort of anticipated would happen by allowing 2 units per acre. We assume more kind of ranchettes, things like that. While Schertz Forest is a bit problematic, that may have been on the dense end of what they sort of expected. Not as, again, as you can slightly see, a line of houses straight down. So that, coupled with the particular problem they are having at Randolph with white-winged dove that roosts on base in the trees, there's some irony to that, it's not lost on us, that get up and then fly around and create hazards, that is a particular situation that they have as well. So with that, the JLUS came back and said, we are no longer comfortable with, and again, the JLUS was driven by the stakeholders, which included not only Randolph as a stakeholder, but the cities, government entities, and then some private sector folks who recommended that document. So it's not the military's document, it was this Joint Land Use Committee's document, and the city was a part of that, recommended that that no longer be 2 units per acre. And essentially, because of the different flight pattern, what they came back with is the minimum lot size on this side is 1 unit per 20 acres, a 20-acre lot minimum, 10-acre minimum on this side, and then again in the area in between, limit to a 10-acre minimum as well. A lot of that had to do with the fact that if you've got these reduced density areas on the side, it becomes problematic to provide services in between. Now, from the city perspective, it's a document that wasn't entirely of our doing. We can take it, we can leave it. We've all heard kind of Randolph talk about the impact of development on base operations and probably have our own thoughts. But I think one factor that we would all likely say is, if we were starting from scratch or we were playing SimCity on a computer, and we had an airport with 2 runways, we likely would not put much development on either end of that airport. It's not something that you say, you know, the place to put a bunch of houses or place to put a lot of development, let's put it at either end of the runway. It just doesn't make sense from that perspective. So the Randolph base operation issues aside, you do have this compatibility issue. So again, I'll go back. I think, did everyone or all but one person who's on our Plan Zoning Commission serve in the military? And show of hands of veterans, folks who served in the military? Yeah. So we only have one that didn't. And I say this for a reason. As we talk about Schertz's history, a lot of the folks who came here and began initially had a tie to the military. This was close housing for Randolph. You worked on base, you were tied to it, things like that. So frankly, the planes overhead, they don't bother you because when you go to work, you got planes overhead as well. When you're stationed at various bases, you got planes overhead or you've got all sorts of stuff. It's part of your life. The comparison I'll use is folks on the east side of San Antonio who have been there for years and years. The sound of the trains in the rail yard doesn't bother them very much because they'll tell you the story. We lived here, so my dad could walk to work because he worked for the railroad. Yeah, there were always train noises. Everywhere he lived, he worked for the railroad. There were always trains. Folks who move in now, they show up going, that's nuts. You got trains at all hours of the night coming and going, an issue. And that's a bit of what the problem is, too. While traditionally Schertz is sort of, you pause your conversation, planes going overhead. Again, the issue is Randolph doesn't fly on weekends. When do most folks, do we think, go out to look for a new house? Are we Saturday or Sunday? If you're new to the area, you're not tied to the military, you got no idea what's over there. It's a military base. That's interesting. Again, if you lived around Kelly, you just moved to, imagine the first time one of those planes comes overhead, large monstrosities that they've got. There's a bit of an issue there, and so I will say that while it's not been maybe as an issue with our residents in the past, our community is changing. There are people with fewer ties to the military. They don't have that connection, and I think they view this in a different way, and that is the concern that Randolph has expressed that, frankly, I share, that makes sense to me, that as the community changes, people have different expectations. And so based on that, what staff is proposing is to look at a comprehensive plan amendment for this area of the South Schertz sector plan. And the idea is that we feel like this issue stands on its own because of those factors, and that we can choose to change it, not change it in an infinite number of ways coming forward. I will say this, that if this change is made, and even if it's not, but likely if it is, one of the things that the South Schertz plan talked about is we want to keep some rural feel in Schertz. We don't want it all to be a massive rooftops to look like, take your pick of cities that you remember what they were, but literally now every inch of green space is developed and grown up. So if we were to make these changes, then in theory, that desire to preserve some rural development, instead of being over here, which is what the plan generally calls for, we would now have over in this area. So it then begs the question, if our goal was to preserve some, but clearly the South Schertz plan didn't preserve all of it. It didn't take the whole area and say it had areas of 2 units per acre, 2 units per acre, 5 units, or 1 unit per 5 acres down in this area. It begs the question, if we make this change because of these factors that make less dense development more sense, then have we met that desire, and does it warrant potentially adjusting the land uses over here to a more dense condition? And again, I'll be real blunt. If you were at council and saw the discussion relative to the Womenhoring Creek line, the rights of entry, those property owners who didn't want it did not want it, and they will not want this. They will not want the thoroughfare plan roads. But again, last night, you had folks representing property owners going, yes, this needs to change, and they'd likely go, whether you change this or not, you ought to look at changing this over here. And then there are the realities of how we provide for the level of service that people expect. And so I'll say this, and I'll obviously likely have to stand up before residents of Laura Heights and answer them as well. But we've been hearing for a long time folks out here saying, we need better fire protection. And that certainly is reasonable. I don't disagree. But part of that is, and while we can say we wish we would have moved more quickly, we would have done, when you moved out here, that was sort of in the middle of kind of nowhere at the time, what was your expectation of fire service when you decided, I want to get away from development and kind of be out on my own? It's that I want to not have the inconveniences of development in suburban and urban style development, but I want all the amenities that go with that as well. So I expect the same amount of police patrols, the same fire response, same EMS response. I don't disagree that. That's not an unreasonable thing to want. But it does beg this question, in these lower density areas, we cannot provide necessarily the same level of service as we do in dense areas. There are just fewer people, it's harder to do, it's harder to pay for it. It creates a challenge. And so there is something to be said, if the expectation is to provide a level of service in this area similar to what we've got in the area we're in now, I think one can make the case that there needs to be a certain amount of density in this area altogether to help pay for those type of amenities. The sewer plants, the trunk lines, because we don't want septic, the fire stations, the police patrols, things like that. And at some point, it becomes problematic to take too large of an area with too low a density and still be able to provide that level of service for the folks who are there today. I think there's that factor. But primarily it's, if the goal is not sort of everything rural and part of it, and if we make this change, then essentially has this change condition to say, kind of take the plan we had, flip it, and then decrease the density over here somewhat as well. That's really sort of what the issue is about. But so you know what we're going to do is run the comp plan amendment here, sort of as a stand on its own, so we don't get the two issues muddy and confused, because technically they're separate, although there's some impacts one on the other. And then we'll look at running this over here, depending on what we hear. Unless it's very clear with these discussions, we don't want to change anything, we will run this one, and then once that's done, we will run the other. And again, I think that helps us frame up and focus on the issue, in part because The challenge, as you know, when we do the north and south and we do a big area, is you've got a large number of people with very diverse interest. One group wants to talk about up here, one wants to talk about down here. It's just hard to let them have their voice heard and be heard when we're trying to deal with all of those. And so that's a benefit of compartmentalizing, as well as we can truly focus on the issues here, and these folks aren't having to sit through 2 hours of discussion up here that doesn't impact them and they're not as interested in. And not that they don't care, but it's not what they're there for, and they become discouraged and dissuaded. And so the idea is to run that. Part of what we are going to do is pull Randolph into that to make sure that as we look at it, that we understand exactly, while the JLU's framed it up the way it framed it up with minimum lot size, we can probably, again, do a designation in the land use plan that provides a little more flexibility on some of those areas as we go forward. But I will give you a heads up. This is a significant change. So likely if Mr. Gormley represents a property owner in that area, he's going to stand up here and say, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. You can't do that. It's not, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree with him that this has a huge negative impact on him and the property owners that are out there and that they represent. This is a big deal. You've heard it before when you've had properties get up here and they want to develop and they're not able to. I just don't want us to not go into this eyes wide open to know these changes have a significant impact. We have residents who own property up in this area who regularly attend city council meetings out of frustration for staff saying, this is what the current plan shows. And they routinely show up, and those who've been to council have seen them there to say, this is what you're doing to me. I don't have an answer for that, but part of, again, like the thoroughfare plan, is you're balancing the larger community needs. And so, again, we'll talk about Randolph and the impact, but to some degree, I want to be clear that staff's larger motivation is, if we started from scratch, none of us would likely say, let's put development at the end of a runway. It's probably the same reason CCMA with the South Schertz plant is going to be interested in what sort of development occurs around the plant. Because again, while they talk about how they deal with smell and things like that, there are likely some uses that are not as compatible. That's the same reason in northern Schertz and our industrial areas, we really do not want residential, and would tell that no, because those folks will only complain about truck traffic, sound, operations, etc. Every kind of use has to have its place, and you have to protect it so that you don't have problems down the road. So again, didn't have everybody before, hadn't necessarily walked you through, so I wanted to kind of give you a heads up on that. Obviously, we will be sending out property owners notices as we move forward on that comp plan amendment, trying to answer questions. Likely, we will try to use these hearings at the plan zoning as the public input. Again, we can certainly pull together information they've got. To some degree, I'm not sure, and we may find a different, we may hear something and say, let's pause, let's take a step back, let's slow down, let's look at it. To some degree, some of this stuff, you're kind of a bit either or on it. You know, you can find some compromise, you can do some things, but some of it's just a fundamental position whatsoever. Again, if Mr. Gormley were a single-family residential developer, he's probably going to stand up here and say, look, if you're giving me anything more than lots of, say, 9,000 square feet or 8,600, you're not helping me. You're not killing me as much, but, and that's a bit of the issue in light of the regulation. So I will point out that there are probably some changes with regard to the clear zone expansion, 3,000 by 3,000, and once we do the comp plan amendment, then there are going to be some UDC changes and things like that we'd have to do as well, not just for down here, but up here too, with regard to floor area ratios primarily. With that, I'll sit down and open the public hearing.
Thank you, Brian. Again, this is a public hearing. Mr. Gormley stayed around for this one. We'll open the public hearing at 7:20.
My name is Alan Gormley. I'm at 16106 Santa Catharina in San Antonio. I had no idea I would have the floor tonight, and I'm not at all comfortable speaking, but I represent folks that are out Lower Seguin Road, where, which is prime development property, and they've got east. Up here, right here by the
Okay, over
curve,
in that area.
right here by the curve. And they have a restriction by planning, or by master plan of one lot per 5 acres or something like that. They've got an annexation strip that assigns some higher or lower density. So I'm in favor of what you're talking for, because this guy, they've lived out there, our own land there for a while, and there's not going to be much 5-acre lots. And if you look at San Antonio, where I know you've been and where I spend a lot of time, the 5-acre lots are in Hill Country Village, Hollywood Park, Chavano Park, rich enclaves, and I guarantee you don't get much, many rooftops on that kind of land. So it impacts you guys. So all I'm here to say is that we're interested in more of the eastern part of your county, and we would like to see that density flexed up some. I happen to be a tree hugger. I'll take anybody out and show you some nice projects, and I have cried about a tree that I had to take out, and I'm very proud. I'm proud that my kids take their friends to my communities and say, my dad did this. Open space is a big deal. I'm not clear yet that your plan's the best way to do that by using large lot zoning. But I'm in favor of the reconsideration of the zoning of the eastern area, and we'll just be watching that. Anything in particular to anything specific, but I think the current plan is very onerous on the people that I represent. I mean, they're not going to raise horses. No, they're not going to raise horses in San Pedro Hills or Hidden Forest or the Woodlands or Bluffton, in San Antonio. So I applaud, in a way, what you're doing, and I'm just here to say we'll be watching this and trying to fit in now and then, but we're going to be looking for a more business-like, reasonable density for our own.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, given there is no other participation from the audience, we'll close the public hearing at 7:25. Open, commissioners, for discussion and comment.
All right, well, since Brian picked me out for being the only non-military guy here.
I wasn't in the military either. You and I are in the same boat. Looks like Dan, he didn't raise his hand.
I would have
either.
picked you out too.
I wouldn't have lasted very long.
I'm going to pick myself out on this one as being the only person up here that lives down in Southern Schertz. So, in general, I think what we're looking at is sound. The protection of the mission at Randolph, I think, is got to be one of our top priorities as a community. Living underneath those flight plans, I enjoy the heck out of hearing those planes come over my house during the day, and it's a phenomenal feeling. And, you know, if we can do something that will accommodate the needs of the future for Randolph Air Force Base to help secure its future, then I think it's something that we really need to seriously look at. When we get to the east side of 1518 and looking at higher density, it makes sense. The one caveat that I'm going to express on there, and I think most of the commissioners here will support me on this, is that as we get closer to Cibolo Creek, we need to look at going back to having lower density. You know, along that creek, you know, we had those two floods in 98 and 2000, and it's been documented that that creek was over 4,000 feet wide, which means a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile on our side of the creek. And yes, that area is not in floodplain, but it has flooded before, and it will flood again. And we, you know, have to recognize the fact that those property owners have the right to sell and allow that land to develop. But because this is our city and it's a home rule city and it's our home, our rules, I think we're doing ourselves a injustice by allowing high density to be within a half mile or 3/4 a mile of the creek, just for public safety purposes. You know, if people want to build there and they want to take that risk, that's fine, but let's make sure it's a minimum number of houses, and that if and when that day comes when our first responders have to go out there and go in the water to pluck those people out of the homes, that it's only a few dozen homes and it's not 2,000 homes. That's all I have to say on that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple things, if you'll indulge me. Any chance we could get them to move the jets onto the other runway? No. No, okay. No, some pretty funky-looking noise contours here. I understand the turnouts and things, but when you pick up these little areas of higher noise, makes me wonder what they're doing. Brian, is there a similar noise contour for the takeoffs to the north? Do you know?
Well, the noise contour they develop based on typical flight operations.
Right.
And so again, if they alter for a bit, the noise contour will vary with it.
I was just curious because I kind of live up here in this, and I was just wondering what it looked like when it goes the other way. I did want to say I understand where the Air Force is coming from. I'm a private pilot, and I fly out of New Braunfels Regional Airport. Now, I just fly a little single-engine puddle jumper. But every time I go up there, it seems like there's another group of houses. And I have not attended any of the New Braunfels planning meetings. I think they have a plan in place to try and protect the airport. But what I see happening up there is encroachment. And you're absolutely right. People don't seem to pay attention to, you know, where they are and then want to complain about it later. So I'm encouraged that the city is trying to be proactive. My other question is, when we talk about development density, are we only talking about residential? Is there a different density for commercial?
Well, yeah, the commercial you tend to measure, or the JLUIS measures in floor area ratio. And so again, it's how much building you will have on how much piece of land. To a point, you know, ideally even if somebody bought a whole lot of property out there, they would not want another Amazon built in this area. The building is too big. Nor would they want a bunch of small buildings on little lots right next to each other. And so this designation will affect them as well. And then again, likely as we modify development regulations in the next step going forward. I would offer this up as well. And again, I certainly appreciate not wanting to harm the mission, and I think there is that. But if we, and not that you're saying this, but if we sort of put too many eggs in that basket, the reality is it just doesn't make sense to put certain uses. So any airport that you see, they've got areas of limited development, reduced floor area ratios of commercial areas around San Antonio International, Austin Airport, for those same reasons. And I think we're really trying to replicate that here, particularly with the number of flights that come off of Randolph and how it's used.
And I think you briefly touched on it, the zones to the north.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have concerns in there as well? I know a lot of it is already developed with Commercial Place and Windy Meadows, but
That's the area where we do have some concern, is some of the development in Windy Meadows relative to some of the types of uses, and then that property that's just off Maskey relative to floor area ratios. But it's a relatively small amount of property, not that we want to ignore it. We need to deal with it. It's just not as significant of an issue because there is less land that's in play. I will point out, though, that there is a slight strip in the APZ2 up here that's zoned residential. It's part of a larger property that's outside the APZ2, so likely the way we would handle that is to, when that property develops, acquire the area in the APZ2 as parkland dedication, which I think would be a win-win. The property owner is going to come in to develop. We're going to say, well, two things. One is, you're in the APZ2, so we're not comfortable with that. He's going to say, okay, well, I can do what I want. Flip side is you got to pay this parkland dedication fee. How much is that? Or you can dedicate land. Oh, really? And so we would like that. You're going to lose it one way or the other. So I think we can deal with that through parkland dedication, all likelihood.
and then the streets I'm seeing, that's Kensington Ranch in Selma up there at the northern end, correct?
That's
right there under your finger.
Kensington Ranch in Selma.
And somewhere in there is now something in Universal City, or is that outside the?
There is a portion of Universal City that crosses the creek. So again, not sure how you're going to do if you have a burglar at your house and you need Universal City PD to get there. Not sure how they're going to make it. But yeah, there is a piece. Again, let me say this. Universal City, Selma, Converse, Schertz, Live Oak, all were part of this group and all had a seat at the table. But again, everybody recommended, not every city agrees with every part of it. And then again, we'll see how much they do going forward. I will say that a couple things real quick. One is, obviously, Schertz is the most impacted by this plan. We have the most area. But the reality is, we are also one of the largest. So unlike Universal City, we've got a lot of area to make adjustments to offset some of the changes over here due to the base operations. And UC doesn't. They're much more limited.
I've been pleased since this issue really came to the table that Schertz has been as proactive as it has. I would hope that new people who come to our city would recognize, if they don't already know it, how significant an economic generator an Air Force base can be, or any base, any military base can be. And, you know, you can listen to people talk about this and that and the other thing, but the fact of the matter is, you know, Randolph's the elephant in the room, and it's there. And the only way we're going to do the right thing is to understand that and willingly accept it as part of our future and work around it. I'm sure that when we get to the public hearing stage, we will get a lot of diverse, if not angry, commentary. And, you know, people need to have their say. But I would also hope then that those who would initially be against what's being proposed would be won over by the positive aspects of keeping Randolph Air Force Base open. Because the last thing I think any of us want in any of the cities around Randolph is BRAC to come down with a hammer and say no more. The economic impact on all of us would be catastrophic. So I'm pleased that the city's done what it's done. Look to continue to participate as we can, and you know, do our best from a Planning and Zoning Commission standpoint to be positive and convey that throughout the city.
Speaking of Kensington Ranch, does Selma not want to play with us? I mean, they're still building high density out in Kensington Ranch.
So
They don't seem to care. So are we putting pressure on them? Are we doing anything with them?
Mr. Kessel may come to blows with their city manager out in the parking lot one evening.
Well, let's all play the game
probably take
fairly.
Johnny Casillas. I don't know if he could take, you know.
And what's the I asked this question
Yeah,
before of the
I'll
Air
give you a
Force.
serious answer. So the reality is, all of the cities have generally been positive and supportive of the JLUIS document when they've spoken about it. Again, I think there's something to be said. Probably everybody's busy. You move on, you forget about it. Maybe they say it, they're not quite so supportive. So again, I think it's part of Randolph is going to look, we really need to start implementing this thing moving forward. Some of the implementation mechanisms we probably need to help kind of restart with regard to some of the lead agencies in that going forward. I will say that one of the problems is once that plat's filed, you're vested, you're moving. And so what you're often seeing up in Selma is things that have already occurred that are continuing as opposed to stopping on the front end. Again, I didn't attend the meetings, haven't spoken with anybody, but as I recall from what I read at the time, there was some discussion of whether this was a cluster development that was consistent with it as well, and that's something we have to deal with going forward. But yeah, the other cities, I've not heard another city saying we're not supportive of the plan.
Well, one positive aspect to that development is to the north. Kensington Ranch is expanding north, not south. Mm-hmm. That might be something for the future.
I'll be interested to hear the Air Force's discussion again, because when I asked the first time, they didn't have an answer. Where does the one house per 20 acres come from? And they pulled it out their butt. Yeah. There is nothing written down, and so if we go and say 1 per 20 acre, there has to be a legitimate reason for that, in my opinion. Why are we going to restrict ourselves to 1 per 20 acres when there's really no justification for it? I mean, I'm a pilot. I understand why, but if the Air Force operates on regulations, directives, things on paper, procedures on paper. If they're just going to pull something out their butt, why would I have to do that? Because when I look at the density on the north side, there's plenty of density on the north side. Are we going to start demolishing houses on the north side? But anyway, I'd like to hear their discussion on that. And then for our consideration on the eastern side of 1518, let's not be hypocritical, because we're going to now have 2 schools directly underneath the flight path of these high-performance jets, and the jets at that particular point underneath the flight path, they're going to be low and dirty. Absolutely, that's the overhead pattern.
We have,
and so Corbett and Rose Garden are going to be directly underneath the flight path of
Ernie, if you look at that hook that turns back to the north, that's typically, they're coming off the runway and they're making that downwind turn headed back the other way. And if you look, that flag-shaped lot right there,
that's Corbett.
And then Rose Garden will be right behind it. So if we're looking to abate some accident potential, geez, we just got 2 schools underneath the flight path. So anyway, let's just be careful in our deliberations in the future so we don't do some silly things.
Yeah, Brian, I guess some of us are not familiar. What I see, and I understand what Richard is saying down there, but the accident potential zones and the compatibility use zones look like strictly on the approach and takeoff. There's no consideration given to the traffic pattern itself. I would like to hope that's based on some kind of empirical data from the Air Force, but just a curiosity thing.
So I will say a couple things, and not certainly to speak for Mr. Bro, but my recollection is he said it was in the flight path, which I take to mean planes flying overhead.
Planes will be directly overhead Corbett, and they'll be directly overhead Rose Garden in a very low airspeed, very dirty situation with the gear down, the flaps down. And if there's any engine problem at that particular point in time, the plane's coming down right there.
And so again, we can certainly, I will say this, and maybe this is a bit of the issue, and one can argue while we're picking and choosing one versus the other. So the particular issues that the JWUS covers, and those are, I would say, to a large degree, they're not entirely based on Air Force and federal regulations, have to do with a couple of things. One is these areas, and I will misspeak when I say it, but for which there is a higher potential for an accident. So a plane could come down anywhere outside of its flight path. It starts coming down, veers off where it normally flies overhead. Overhead of us, planes fly every day. We have that issue. So again, I'll use the analogy. There is a certain amount of risk we accept. The example I've used for some of you in the past is when you get on to fly Southwest Airlines up to Dallas, in case you don't want to get up early and drive, and there's an ashtray in the armrest. And you're thinking, when's the last time they let people smoke on an airplane, and how old is this plane that I'm flying on? And again, I think of it like a car. The older the car is, the more it tends to break down. If we wanted to minimize the risk of commercial planes crash, we'd fly them one time, scrap them, and they're always new. But we don't. We fly in a Southwest plane that's got an ashtray in the armrest that's older than some of the people in this room, most likely, which is crazy to think about. It's crazy when you go out to Randolph and they're flying planes from the 60s. To me, that's just absolutely nuts. But so there's a certain amount of risk we accept, and part of that is the flight path. But there are others where we say it's too great or it's too problematic. Those are the clear zones, the accident potential 1 and the accident potential 2, which, based on their studies, have a higher likelihood that there will be a crash there. The other, and this is, again, it's not necessarily going to kill you, but it's the sound attenuation issue in those sound contours, and those are really where it affects development occurring in terms of a base land use. You have other height restrictions, you've got light and glare, you've got dust and things like that. So that's really the case. So again, I will say the caveat is the what's the school up here off the end of Main Street, the alternate school now? Well,
Allison
down at the end of
Steele.
1518, Allison Steele. And I'm not looking at Lisa for any reason that somehow she went there. That didn't mean to imply that.
Just so you know, I did not.
A Clemens graduate.
That's right.
That, I believe, is in the APZ2, or APZ1, just to be clear. I think, and I have to look, but when I looked before, it's there. So we have a school, it's there, but the schools that are being built in down south are not within that area, nor is the charter school. But certainly we can have Randolph come and talk about how they came up with that 1 per 10, 1 per 20. Again, I'll sort of fall back to some degree. At the end of a runway, you wouldn't likely put a lot of development. And so frankly, 1 unit per 10, 1 unit per 20, in light of the potential challenges and issues and conflicts in land use, doesn't strike me as that out there. We have situations here that are not good today. And if you live there, you probably deal with some of those implications. Just because we have them, we don't want to perpetuate them. But then additionally, Randolph will tell you, based on the typical flight patterns, it's more problematic at this end than the northern end as well. But Randolph will be here, and we can have them talk through how they came up with that.
And the Air Force draws these as rectangles. But the reality is that after takeoff, as you get further from the runway and you're gaining altitude, while the potential may still be there, it's the further you get out. So by the time you get out to the southern end of this APZ2 or whatever, you have a lot more control over what happens afterwards. But Brian, give me a call and I'll take you up in my 1968 Cessna 182.
The year I was born. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Again, my point's just been made. And I will say that next time what we can do, and I know I've got it in here somewhere, we do have a flight pattern map that shows the frequency of flights and the way they fly as one of the documents, and we can provide that.
I'm sure the pilots would be interested in seeing that.
I'm sure they would as well.
On the sector plan, I understand and I agree with your reasoning to separate it into a east and west type of discussion. Mm-hmm. But will you keep the sector plan the same and just announce the public hearings for east and west, or are we going to make a sector plan southwest and a sector plan southeast?
Yeah, well, and again, why we kind of called it a sector plan at the time, what we will likely do is the notice will describe we are doing an amendment to our comprehensive land use plan, and then describe the area. And again, we would start with the area generally west of 1518, north of 1604.
Because I agree. If I lived way out on Ware Seguin or way out there by the creek, I wouldn't want to come to the.
And that's the problem when you do these things citywide. You're making people sit through this thing that's covering the whole city, and it can be viewed as a way to discourage public participation, in fact.
Do you have a broad timetable in mind?
We are going to look at getting the notice out ASAP. So as probably will due to the notice time frame. So it will likely hit you for the first hearing in probably the meeting after next, as opposed to the next meeting.
Hey, Brian, if I could chime in.
Yes,
real
Dan.
quick. If you can get the dimensional diagrams
Mm-hmm.
from the JLUS, they're really informative.
Yes.
For those looking at them, because this isn't flat, and it has the rise on it, and I tell you, when we went through this with Abilene, where our mission was the B1 and the C-130J, you should have seen the noise contours and the elevations and the APZ 1 and 2, because they went out extensively, and we ended up regulating it all the way past our ETJ because of how long it takes those to go up. But what really helped everybody in the audience to understand the significance of it was when we got the dimensional drawings from the Air Force, and we were able to put those up because it looked like a stadium.
Yeah.
As it goes up. So
We'll include those. We'll kind of prepare a packet. Again, and I will say this, we'll include a lot of that information from the JLUS that we have, but frankly, I still fall back. For me, I still kind of come back, if you were doing it from scratch, you just wouldn't put stuff at the end of any kind of runway, whether it's Randolph or an international airport or whatever. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, I would agree with that, Dan. That's a help.
So yeah, I have to ask the question,
Mm-hmm.
what was Universal City thinking?
You
That's a
know,
rhetorical question.
It wasn't important at the time.
Not now.
I think, and I will go back and I'll say this, and this goes back to the first conversation we had about roads. Back then, when Universal City started, we weren't thinking we were going to be here. It was a little bit of development here. It's not that big a deal. It's folks that work at Randolph. It is amazing how hard it is for people to imagine the future, even though they can look back and see that same time frame and how different the world was.
You know, I poke fun at them because of the approach to the east runway where we have houses, but that crosshatch area on the west runway, that's their industrial park, correct? And if I understand correctly, they did take some actions there to severely limit.
They did. So Universal, and again, I will say this before we get too critical, every city's in a different situation. Universal City is a much smaller community than us. They have much less land to develop. So while we have a large area here, these changes have less of an impact on us than I think this proposed document has on Universal City. I think it's fair.
Their citizens are expendable. The chief, the chief of staff of the Air Force said yesterday that they would love to have a BRAC, and that they have 25% more bases than they need. So this is ever more important now than it ever was.
Yeah.
That if they get their way, it's going to be a fight.
And then lastly, again, if I could repeat this. The reality, and Mr. Richmond said this, the reality we have today is there is an active airport with types of flights that they have. That is occurring today. It would be irresponsible for us to not plan in a manner that's consistent and compatible with that today, because we don't know what will happen. It may close, it may not, and even if it closes in 10 years, to put a bunch of stuff there that becomes at risk or is problematic is an issue. And then finally, if that were to occur, if flight operations were to cease, then we revisit the issue, because you've got to change condition. We've got area that's largely undeveloped that may be appropriate to redevelop at that point in different situations. So I'll be quiet.
Very good. Thank you, Brian. Two very interesting situations that will be on our plate before we know it. Okay, next on our agenda, item number 6, requests and announcements. Requests by commissioners for items on the future agenda. I think we all know what's coming on the future agenda.
Not a request or anything, but just a quick question. I did ask a couple meetings ago about when we were sending out these notices, that if we are to be included in that, you can do it via email or whatever, but at least that way the commissioners know that those are going out, and when people that we know in the community contact us, we know what's going on.
All right, anything else? Any courses attended, places attended of interest to the group? All right, city staff, Lisa, Ryan, Rice.
I just wanted to mention that we, commissioners, you have a CCAB update from the November 16th meeting and the January 18th meeting in your packet with a kind of summary of everything that's going on.
Yeah, great idea. Very helpful to keep us in the know. We need to be reminded.
Just to mention, I referenced this earlier, but a few city council meetings ago, and I got to make sure I say this right, we had an engaged, interested citizen, not a disgruntled, grumpy citizen, stand up at council and say, why do we not have the videos available for folks online just to view at their leisure? And so we said, all right, that's a great idea. We agree with that, as opposed to, okay, how do we get him not to keep hounding us on that? Let's just post them. So we have a link on our website now. As we're updating the website, which we're going through that process, we'll add more, but there's a link now. So you can watch those council videos. But the good news is we thought that was such a great idea, and because we have such a good-looking, dynamic, photogenic Planning and Zoning Commission with such great presence, we will also be doing that with Planning and Zoning Commission meetings as well, because it's in here and we can record them. We'll start posting those as well. We actually think that's good for citizens saying, hey, I've got this big case. What happened at P&Z? They can easily go back and look at it. So just be aware that going forward, you can go home and watch yourselves over and over.
Good for you guys. That's good. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to become a reality TV star.
Exactly. It is a good idea. It's something that makes sense to do. So again, we thought we'd move forward with doing P&Z as well.
Okay.
And
Fine.
Channery's got the site plan as well, just when you get a chance.
So this site plan is for Cottonwood subdivision, which is as you're driving on Schertz Parkway, just south of Children's Lighthouse, in between Children's Lighthouse and the gas station on the corner of Live Oak Road and Schertz Parkway. We recently approved an amending plat that combined, it was previously lots 2 and 3, and the applicant proposed to combine the lots. So we processed an amending plat that was just recorded earlier today. So it is now lot 5 of the Cottonwood subdivision. It's about 2.3 acres in size, and the applicant submitted a site plan application to us. And as you can see, they have proposed a total of 3 buildings. The 3 buildings closest to the gas station, buildings 3, 4, and 5 here, are each 3,600 square feet in size, and the 2 buildings at the northerly portion near the Children's Lighthouse, buildings 1 and 2, are each 4,500 square feet in size, for a total of 19,800 square feet within the entire lot. And the proposal is for it to be an office complex. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Channery.
Mr. Richmond, I would like to share one other thing is, because I mentioned to you this morning, but just so the entire commission knows is, I know y'all have asked many times about updates to the Unified Development Code, and we are currently working on probably about 4 or 5 amendments to the UDC. So probably late spring, maybe some a little bit before that, late spring, early summer, you'll see those. Maybe some before that, but I don't want to promise something that if something comes in like this comp plan amendment might take more time than. But we are working on those, so you'll see those coming soon. And then I wanted to share, just because I know y'all are interested, also in the building inspection side. If you haven't been at council or council orientation, one of the things that, or two of the things that we've done in building inspections is, and also it actually affects planning as well, as we've made all of our forms fillable, PDF fillable, and we have 2 kiosks in the front. So the people can come in, fill out the forms directly. We have a printer out there. They can print them. They can print any documents, city forms, city documents that they need, and use them there. Our permit technicians are going out and helping folks fill out documents until people understand the process. And then the other big thing is we went to using our web QA system where folks can request online inspections. And so instead of them calling them and faxing them in, we're taking inspections online now. So folks can do it from their smartphone. They can do it from their tablet. I have a couple of builders who've called me and said, this is fantastic. I can sit at home and I can schedule my inspections in the evening and know that they'll be on the next day for inspection. And then they get notice when we've inspected it, and it tells them that it's passed or failed, and then comments if it's failed, conditions potentially, what need to be fixed. And so it's been it seems to be working very well for folks, including us, which has cut down on a lot of time of processing paperwork in the mornings, of getting the inspections on a list that were manually being typed in. They're now put in by the builders. And so it's been a big help. Since the beginning of January, we've processed between 850 and 900 inspections, and had very positive feedback. And since y'all are kind of part of that process, kind of wanted to share that with you also.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Technology moves us all forward. Final comment. As many of you know, if not all, Ken Greenwald is in the hospital again. So I would ask everyone to hold him and his family in their prayers. Ken, a long-standing, great guy in the city of Schertz with a wealth of knowledge, and too young to be called home. So hopefully he can be prepped well for surgery and successfully handle that and be back among us soon. That being said, no additional business to conduct this evening. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Gombeck, we are adjourned 7:58.
You know, that development they just showed?